All right, we're here. Hi, it's Achilles Justice with Philosophy Society. It's May 8th, 2024. We're in the library today. We have new people in the room and people online. And we're going to continue with the 7 Habits book. This is an older edition. I have the other one over here. But first, I'm going to give an introduction to the group for our new friends. So basically, my thesis generally, there's a good video where I explained it to some new people about a month ago. So it's on YouTube. It's the Philosophy Society is a wise group. What does that mean? I think that's the title of it. So you can watch that. It's good. It's like almost like a podcast, right? And the purpose is, so philosophy is the love of wisdom, right? And like that's how the Greeks, the definition comes from them. And so traditionally, philosophy has been basically like making sense of things. Like wisdom, if you look at like what they're actually doing, like philosophers, is to make sense of ideas, concepts, and then we developed ethics, right? And you know, going right from like Socrates, especially Western philosophy, like Socrates until today, right? We've just been trying to make sense of things, whatever those things are. So it could be like God, it can be like free will, it can be like you know, different kinds of like concepts and stuff, like body and mind, right? Like,
and it very much like shapes society too, because from like those ethics and whatnot, you create your laws, society, way of life, culture, everything.
So making sense of things is important. But when we think about the concept of wisdom, I would say, and maybe others would agree, that making sense of things is only part of it. Conceptual analysis is only part of what it means to be a wise person, right? And so wisdom, I would say, encompasses living well, or eudaimonia, like the good life. And so that's where I'm going with philosophy in more of a practical sense of how to live our lives, right? So it's not just how we think about things, but it's also how we behave. And it's not just an individual thing, it's a group thing, hence the philosophy group or society, right? And so when we look at being wise, part of what that means is to like not make certain mistakes. Like, oh, that was stupid. You had your shoelaces untied and you fell down and then you get hit by a car. Well, that was a dumb way to die. Like, you know, like you should have just had your shoelaces tied, right? So just not doing certain things, you would say is wise, right? And so, especially when it's explicit, like don't do this, like don't stare at the sun all day. You're going to go blind, right? Like just don't do that. Like we know certain things.
Yeah, people did during the eclipse.
Trump is like, he's like, I can do it. I'm tough, or something like that, you know?
It was the most Google thing after like the eclipse too. Like, why do my eyes hurt?
Yeah.
Anyways, kidding.
No, it's great. It's great.
Sidetracked.
So being foolish is on one end,
Yeah.
right? And then there's wisdom kind of on the other end, you know? And so the purpose of having a philosophy society, like why we come here and we participate in this, is so that we can almost get like the force of nature of social groups. Social groups, like that's how humans evolved, right? It was together. We're not just like one person. You're just like alone. You know? You're like, oh, there's another person. Like, where'd you come from? You know what I mean? Like we're just like kind of like a hive mind a little bit. And so that can be a good thing and a bad thing. And so the bad stuff is like cognitive biases, things like prejudice and discrimination, all that kind of stuff. And so what we want to do is we want to figure out a way to live well together, that we avoid those negative biases and we enhance our learning from the group process and the group mechanisms, right? And we see this in institutions that run really well, like hospitals run pretty good, like all things considered. Like 200 years ago, so I don't know, you know what I mean? Like you go to the butcher, he's gonna cut your leg off, it's gonna suck, right? But if you're here in the hospital, it's pretty efficient. Like they've figured some things out. We have plastic, for example, that helps hospitals out a lot, you know? And so society in general is a group-based function. That's what it is. And so the philosophy society is how do we live well together as a group, and we're aware of these biases. And then so there's what's going on, and then there's like what we want to become, like the normative thing, like where are we going to go, right? And the gap between those is a practice, right? And so in religious groups, there's like scripture, and there's a whole bunch of different scriptures, right? Agreement among them. I don't know. We'll talk about that.
How long do you have?
Yeah, many weeks. And so basically, there's a practice on how you enact your life to fulfill what the scripture says, or the interpretation of that scripture. And there's like traditions and little cliques and like different ways that certain religious groups will do that, right? Fundamentally, though, it's just a group of people that are following certain principles or dogma They can be dogmatic about it, which is bad. That's why religion, we can criticize it and say there's something wrong here, right? Because there's no critical thinking involved. But fundamentally, there is a group force. There is a dynamic that's occurring here, and that we see this in other groups too. That is just, it just is like gravity. There's a nature here in humans, right? And so how can we utilize this nature in the best way possible? This is what I mean when I say philosophy society. I'm basically like, I'm not really teaching the history of philosophy. I'm teaching what I think, and you can say I'm wrong, and that's fine. What I think philosophy is and ought to be. And it's something that we all do together, right? And it's just like self-defense. Like I did self-defense for a long time. I come from Thunder Bay, Ontario. It's like the murder capital of Canada, whatever.
Not for the strip clubs. They kind of
The shrimp clubs?
strip clubs.
Oh yes, I wouldn't go there.
No, I know. I have friends that like worked up there. It's like it's a town where like miners go to, or oilers go to, just go to the strip club. And,
Yeah.
It's like fun too.
It's okay. We talked about pornography and prostitution last week, I think.
Then right across the street.
Yeah. Like I think there's a place for these things. I think the reason we like it is because we evolved probably watching younger people have sex, and it just became a thing in our DNA that we have a thing there. You know, there's an explanation we can make evolutionarily from that. But I think that sometimes people can get confused, specifically with like strip clubs or prostitution, that they're learning the skills of attracting a mate in this artificial environment, and that's actually a bad thing. You know, because then you're not really learning how to get what you need. You're just like doing some ineffective coping mechanism.
You see it as a service in a way, and you kind of like delusions what that should actually be versus a transaction.
Yeah, like it's a very much transactional on a monetary basis alone, right? And then there's these other things that you get for the money, right? But someone made a good point that like there's escorts that do like 10 minutes of sex and like 50 minutes of mental health, like counseling to their client or whatever, you know? And maybe that is a good thing. I don't know, like it's like whatever, like.
Well, sex is a very physical and mental thing, right? And so like, it's very taxing on both, and a lot of your mental, like depending on how you view a profession.
Well, as long as there's autonomy and consent, like I think there's a way to do it. Like you can choose to do it if you want, you know? But then if it's like the sex trafficking situation, like that's not.
Yeah, there's ethical
As long
means.
as it's consent.
Yeah.
There's ethical means to like those kind of businesses and whatever morality that you might put them on, right?
So yeah, anyway, so that's
That's the
little tangent right there. So the Philosophy Society, like why it's because it's part of it is that our individual nature is that we develop habits, right? And we can do that intentionally or unintentionally. Like you can have a bad habit, you're like, shit, like I'm gonna die from fucking smoking cigarettes now. Like that's not good. I have this habit, it sucks, right? And it's a stress coping mechanism, whatever. And so what we want to do is we want to identify our weaknesses. Then the wisdom part would be to say, I'm going to practice habits with other people that will respond to those weaknesses. One of them, the critical thinking and making sense of things that traditionally the philosophy academic canon is about, is important, right? And you can learn reading and writing and listening, like lectures and stuff like that. And then the peer review process, when you publish in these kinds of things, this is important, you know? But when you think about wisdom and you're like, that's a wise person, usually it's not going to be someone who's stressed out to submit a paper to some journal article, you know what I mean? Or they're being an asshole to each other and they're arguing. You wouldn't think that's wise, you know, or like having a disagreeable personality trait. Like, really? Is that what wisdom has come to in the university? And so the university has a function. Predominantly, it's like reading, writing, critical analysis, right? And then there's specific texts that they do. And that's like a philosophy degree. I have 2 philosophy degrees. And sure, I think it's important to go through those things. Like part of my vision for this is as an educational institution, or whatever you want to call it, there'd be other people like you guys who can come and you guys could be facilitators and teach. And in that context, you'd have to take a couple philosophy classes, like critical thinking, early modern philosophy, you know, and then things that are specific to your viewpoints, what you think is important and what you're going to speak about, right? So, but just a general person who's living in the world may not need to do that. But I would say that they do need to do this. It would be good for them in their mental health to participate in the Philosophy Society, whatever that is, right? And that is the thing where we're practicing these skills. One of them is critical thinking and reasoning. but other things too, like how to live our lives, and then discussing it. So this specific segment of this general institutional idea that I have is more of a theoretical lecture kind of discussion-based thing where I'm communicating. But I'd like to see like specific modules, like a meditation module. And then you go in and you learn the science of meditation, you practice it, you do it, right? And then there'd be like a group, almost therapy module where people can come in, kind of like AA, but not with the God and stuff like that.
Yeah. So different support group of some kind.
So whatever we need,
Mhm.
you know? And then we use the wisdom part and the philosophical, I don't know, rigor as the basis that brings us together. You know, like let's make that the value set, the thing that we all agree upon, instead of it being like worshiping something that we have to have faith in, whatever that thing might be. You know, I had come from a Catholic background too.
Mhm.
And the thing that I didn't like was the lack of questioning, just the indoctrination. I was like, this is uncomfortable. I didn't understand it, you know? And it made me really feel weird that I was one of the only ones that didn't think it was good. I was like, why is it just me that thinks this is a problem?
Yeah, and in a way, you kind of think it's cultish in a way too, because I've had the same thing with my friends growing up, where it's like, well, why don't you like church? Why don't you go to church? And I'm like, well, because you kind of grow with it, like you're, in a nicer way to put it, like brainwashed into it, especially if you're born into it.
Yeah.
But my friend who is an atheist and like amongst a bunch of Catholics, like, you're kind of weird, but I mean, he questioned it more, and that is something that should be more practiced. And I really like understand like where you're coming from too, because you know, you're taught at a very early age, like this is God, this is the church, this is how you should live, and like you're only moral if like or ethical if you attend church or follow these practices.
Yeah.
But we only know that from an early age. But you're right, there needs to be more questioning within Catholicism or any religion, really.
All of them. Yeah, and it's not that's the thing, is like that's the seed of its destruction. It's not that institution, the way that the scripture is built is not, or sorry, the dogma is built is not to be questioned,
Mhm.
you know? And
follow, like be obedient and follow.
it's true. And so in some instances, obedience may be good. Maybe it's okay to follow, but we need to always have, like, that's one of those social forces, right? Obedience, conformity, authority. And social psychology has shown us a lot of interesting data, like the Milgram experiment, where people were like brought into a room and there's a Confederate and the one guy's getting shocked, and like a large percentage of individuals would shock the guy, even though he was faking it, until he like died, you know? And this is an account for like the presence of an authority figure is all it really takes to create like a Holocaust-like situation. And that's why they studied this stuff. So
Just follow orders, right?
yeah, and so that's that social force, right? Or the social nature that we have. And so how can we utilize this in a good way, right? Because some people, and I've talked about this in the previous videos, they may lack the cognitive capacity. Their minds or their brains they don't really reason, actually. They just feel things and they just do what they think is cool, or, you know, but they don't actually comprehend abstract information. So being philosophical for them is not really going to work. Like, you guys understand stuff, right? Your IQ is like above 120, right?
I like to think so. It's been a while since I tested.
I hope so.
My friends are different.
But some people, and it's not their fault, their brains and or mind just doesn't work that way. And it could be depreciated by their existing mental health state, right? They're just super stressed out, or there's substance abuse stuff going on. And so they have to rely on conforming. They can't do it on their own. And that's maybe why the herd has survived, is there's a spectrum of, I don't like to use intelligence per se. I think cognitive capacity is better, because my capacity can be depreciated by getting drunk, for example, or being really tired or sleepy, you know, or certain situational or environmental factors. And then we could say, like, what's your capacity over time? And we could like do like an average, maybe that's IQ, I don't know, whatever. So the point is that there's a reason for us to, like, why would you come back, right? And my inspirational, motivational discussion here is to say that there is a value to learning and practicing these skills, whatever those skills might be, right? And like meditation is one, learning how to manage your life, learning how to deal with people, learning how to deal with narcissists, right? How do we deal with a democracy? Like, how do we make a healthy democracy? Because currently, and we can discuss this, like, there's a Trumpism phenomenon, right? Like, he has violated 10 or 11 of his gag order things, which means that he has put people their lives in jeopardy in some ways because people have like went after those individuals to their homes, right, to like kill them or something, you know.
Yeah.
Not good. Like that's the rule of law is important, you know, to some degree, in the sense that we have a fair and equitable society. You know, there is no monarch that can just do whatever they want. We've been there, and that didn't work out well, even though Canada is still kind of like stuck in that slightly. Part of this is like, I feel on one end of the spectrum, this is basically the same talk I did, but I'm doing it again.
Okay. Good.
Is we're going to help people with mental health issues
Mhm.
preventatively, right? When you learn these things and you have a community base that will facilitate and socialize you on how to live well, then you're not going to develop certain mental health issues, like depression, for example,
Mhm.
right? And then retroactively, it can help people that existingly have mental health problems, right? So if you're anxious about something and you have a place you can communicate about it, then you can work through the way you're thinking about it and think of action plans and go through with it. And the social group can motivate you to do it. Boom, that's great. That's a good thing,
Yeah.
right? So that's on the one hand, mental health stuff. On the other hand, it's, well, how do we have a good society, right? And a good society, a democratic society, is only good as far as the votes are, right? If people are ignorant or their vote is based on like those social forces, like propaganda is influencing them,
Mhm.
they just, Trump makes them feel good, it's funny, and that's all that matters, or whatever, right? You know, that's a problem. Or when we remove free speech, as in like Russia, and anyone that criticizes Putin goes to jail,
Mhm.
like that's a serious problem, right? Because there's no arbiter of what is true, what is real. And it's important for us to know what is reality, just to whatever degree we can, or at least the appearance of it, right? There's blatant lying, and then there's like our approximation of what is. And we want to get as close as we can to what is. If we can't, then it's like you're really lost. Like the hall of mirrors is endless at that point, because now you can't even trust your own perceptions or observations of things, never mind other people. We want to be able to have a sense of oneness with ourselves, right? And that's going to encompass our mental health and just existing as a human being, but then also together too. And so how do we bridge the gap of those two things? And that's a problem. It's difficult to figure that out, because from the very basis of like single-celled organisms, where one of them is surviving off of like photosynthesis, and the other organism is eating the photosynthesizing cell, right? There is self and other, and there's this dichotomy between them. You know, that's just like how we exist. So how do you solve that? That's a problem, right? And so our instincts will take us only so far, and then education and the social buffer is how we're going to have to really do it. There's nothing else you can say. You can rely on AI if you want, or maybe aliens. Okay, you know, maybe, but what if there's a problem with either of those things?
Mhm.
Or God? You know, what if God just decides to be an asshole one day? Like there's a big flood, you know, like it's good for you to read it and be like, oh, that sucks for them. But what if you're the one dying? You know what I mean? You're like, oh, okay, maybe it's a little different now, right?
Yeah.
So my solution to that is, let's take our instincts, take the way that we've evolved, and utilize that as the only defense we really have to begin with. That our brains wire together, right? We develop habits, we remember things. This is useful. Memory is a really good thing, right? It could be bad, but let's make it a good thing. And so that's how I understand making sense of human nature and then society, and then using philosophy or being philosophical as a cultural tradition that we can socialize each other to be good people. Because what the fuck else are you gonna do? You know, like this, the world is like a little topsy-turvy. Like, you know, like Xi Jinping recently went to Serbia and France and one other country.
Okay.
And that's good, because it's kind of like, he's like, yeah, I'm dealing with this guy named Putin. I don't think he knows what he's doing, and I don't know what to do with him. You know what I mean? So let's try to just, you know, take it slow, and because I don't want to piss him off either. And I get that, right? He's like, I think he loves his people, you know, like Xi Jinping. I don't really know. I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so, give him the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, some people don't believe in democracy. Some people believe that there should just be one ruler, you know, and maybe that's that conformity thing, that they just want to flow and not worry about stuff, that maybe this person knows best. And Dodgy brought this up last time. But the problem is like, well, how do we know who this person is, this omniscient, omnibenevolent individual, whoever that person is, right? How do you decide who the king is, you know? And like, if anyone's seen Game of Thrones,
yeah,
and that little bastard. What was his name?
Bran,
No, the little
Tyrion.
fucker. No, that little bastard.
Oh, Ramsey.
No.
Oh, Joffrey.
Yeah, that
Yes.
guy.
Sorry, so many assholes there.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I'm an actual small. That's
Okay, yeah. Well, Tyrion's an old man, so. But anyways.
There's one scene that I just don't. But yeah.
Oh yeah. Is it?
There's so
Is it the one with Sansa where he just like threatens to do something to her on her wedding day, kind of thing, and like have
No, it's when he makes the girl kill the other girl with the club thingy. That one just like
I don't think
for the rest of my life, I like it. Just it hurt me. You know,
you made
like,
one girl kill another girl.
yeah, they were like his like mistresses, and then yeah. Anyways,
I thought that was Ramsey. Anyways, okay.
I don't know. It's just yeah. So do we want that guy as king? No, right? Like maybe it's good for him, but this and then when you look at the psychopath, we talk about this too, right? What are you like? What are you doing? You know, are you a silo? And when we intellectualize what this individual's motivations and their madness is, it doesn't make sense, right? Like because they're compartmentalizing, right? There is, you know, their lack of conscience, even if you're colorblind to morality. Okay, fine, you know, but then we're going to evoke Immanuel Kant. You have a duty to act in a certain way, and there's certain principles to follow, right? And it's almost like there's an argument to be made that religious scripture was developed for the psychopath because they just don't know what to do, and so they have just follow these rules, okay? You know, here's your 10 rules, follow them, and you'll be okay. You know, and everybody else, there's some stories there. There's a whole market of people that are like, I need to have. You know, make it like fun for me. You know what I mean? Like, and the guy got eaten by a whale. I was like, okay, that's like, you're all right. You know what I mean? Like, it's easier. Or like infinite fish. Like, here you go. Like infinite wine. Let's get drunk and eat fish. This is great. Like, okay, you know, like we can think about that. So I know Christianity, so I can,
Yeah.
you know, I can like.
No, I mean it's funny. Like one of my best friends, the same one who became very atheist, or became an atheist. I used to go to church quite a bit, and one of the most offensive things he said to me at the time was like, "Jesus Christ is as fictional as Santa Claus." I'm like, that's so offensive, man. Like we're in a church and like these are people's beliefs and whatnot, but like as I get older, I'm like, he's not completely wrong. Like I'm sure he existed, but like walked on water.
Yeah, I think that there's like in the first rendition of the Philosophy Society, when I was in Thunder Bay, I did it for like 5 years there. I had an elderly guy who was very into science and like followed like Richard Dawkins and like, you know, was an atheist like myself. And part of the Philosophy Society was to have so Sam Harris will talk about some conversational pressure with religious extremists. Like just ask a couple questions or be a little skeptical of some things that they say. That's the start, you know, of the seed of critical thinking or whatever. And he literally went to like a Baptist church and just met people and just stood there and was like, I am the voice of reason to some degree, you know, like, and he was very kind and just talked with them, you know, and then he would go to the church first. I used to do the class from 2 to 6 on Sundays. So he would go to the church and then he would come to see me after and report his experiences of whatever, you know, and they loved him because no one would ever do that. How many scientists that don't believe in God would go to a church and communicate about science to them? That's very rare, if ever happens, right? So yeah. So the reason I'm saying that is I think there's a healthy way to do it, and then you can be passive aggressive and like hurtful.
Yeah.
You know, because people still believe things. I make fun of it a little bit. I try to use comedy to kind of like make people be like, well, maybe that just doesn't make sense, you know. And then sometimes maybe I'm, you know, you could tell me if I'm being mean. I'm sorry.
I'll let you know.
So yeah, so that's my idea for the Philosophy Society. I think that when we look at the world, there needs to be some cultural group, not a cult, right? Cults are different in the sense that there's a leader that is basically worshipped. They're cut off from society, the members. All their money gets devoted to the group, right?
Scientology.
Yeah. So there's certain properties that are completely not what's going on here. This is a very educational, open environment, and it's to integrate ourselves into society in a healthier way, right? And then develop the tools to identify authority figures and then have some way to communicate with them, right? Whether it's in an employment context or just in general in society, you know? And yeah, I think there's a lot of work and room to be done for like specific kinds of social situations that emerge, and then how can an individual respond to those social situations. You know what I mean? Like the bystander effect, right? With the increase of individuals in an emergency, there's a decrease in response to do something about it, right? So I think that's what it means to have a wise group. And there is some information in the philosophy. So this is my philosophy. So it would be like a new philosophy, basically. It's not something that people have really talked about before. I don't think. Maybe, I don't know.
What kind of new philosophy would you call this?
I don't know. We can talk about it. Like, I don't know, it's called the philosophy of society just because it just makes sense. Which is really just society. Like, what other kind of society do you have if you can't think about stuff? Or want to like live well, you know?
North Korea?
Yeah, exactly, right? So yeah, so that's basically what I think is the correct thing to do with my life.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. Like but the closest way I can describe it is like close to a somewhat ethics class, and like how you take with those ethics and like learn about different modes of idea and like how can you implement them into society, everyday life, work, family, friendships, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, like I'll go through stuff and like, so I have 7 basic ethical principles, basic I say, that I apply to situations like beneficence.
So is this what you're talking about, or it's your own kind of thing? This is something completely different. Never mind.
So yeah, so there's ethical, we can talk about ethics, right? And then there are specific kinds of subjects that I think are relevant to living a good life. Aristotle wrote the Nicomachean Ethics and the Eudaimonean Ethics. And those are books where he talks about like the good life in some ways, how to be a virtuous person, right? And that was his approach. And he discusses like developing practical wisdom, like learning how to apply virtues in specific situations. And over time, you'll get better at it and you'll know the nuances of being courageous, for example, or whatever, you know, when you practice being a courageous person. And so I think being virtuous is part of it, but living a good life, I would argue it is also the absence of mental illness. You know, like the mind is like an operating system in some ways. It's like something that you utilize and do. You have certain faculties, like I said, memory and attention. And you can utilize like your awareness of your own narrative. And you can utilize the mind to manage your existing state or whatever else is going on in your life and make decisions and stuff. So a good life would be one where my mind is not ill. How I manage myself or my awareness of myself is good. You know, it doesn't produce problems. It reduces conflict, and I'm on an upward trajectory of growth, right? I'm not suffering unnecessarily. There's going to be some pain and suffering in life, but it's just like, you know, that's what it is. We don't need to add to it, you know, like in our relationships. We don't need to be around people that are making things harder or worse for ourselves. It's not good, right? And part of being an adult, being an independent person, is to discriminate and say, this person's not good, this person is good, right? And then you keep the ones that want the best for you in your life. That, and again, like there's a sense of compassion and empathy and awareness. Like there's certain basic properties I think that we need to have. And as the philosophy society, we want to facilitate that. So when we see
more members,
he comes. Nice to see you here. So what do you think? Did I tell you what the philosophy society is?
Yes.
What did I say? All right. So the philosophy society is a wise group. And when we say wisdom, we mean not making certain mistakes or things that will make us successful. Let's do those things, right? And so humans have certain biases, and there's certain social forces that humans have, right? So as a philosophy society, not only do we want to have an understanding of things conceptually, but we want to live well as too, right?
Yeah.
And so the philosophy society has the philosophical foundation, right? People are encouraged to take philosophy classes and to share the wisdom of those concepts that apply to the things that we're talking about. And generally, I am the person who has taken the most classes, just because that's all I do. And so discussing what does it mean to live well, right, is part of what this group is about. And to segue into today, so there are some books that we do go through some books. And the first book I went through was Feeling Good by David Burns. And the reason I go through that book is because he teaches the philosophy of CBT, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. It
Mhm.
was written in 1980. He's a psychiatrist. He was a student of Aaron Beck, and he was like the founder of CBT, like made it. Like 70% of people roughly that read this book over about 4 weeks are almost cured of their depression, right? It's in the beginning of the book. They had like a study on the book.
Mhm.
So I would say that living well, it's good for us to not waste emotional energy or suffer unnecessarily because of our feelings, whatever those feelings are, right? And that could be in our relationships. It can be in how we make decisions. It can be, the way we see things and our expectations of the world. That's the first book I went through. So I went through that book like maybe 2 years ago, almost now, last year.
Mhm.
And then I did like a year-ish, 9 months, 10 months of discussing what the Philosophy Society is, like all of the areas. And so all of those videos are posted. I started with the first, I wrote a paper for this ethics capstone course.
It was just YouTube, Philosophy Society.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can just YouTube, look up me, Achilles Justice, and it'll be there. And so you guys can listen to those, and that'll be great because it'll bring you back up to speed, right? And then, because you'll see where I'm going with this stuff. And then, and I'll go through specific case situations, like, a narcissist or like maybe there's a psychopath or something like that. And like, what do we do? How do we respond to these things? And so the next book is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so we are in the beginning of the book. We're doing habit 1 today. I'm supposed to finish habit 1. So we have an hour left. I can probably get through habit 1. Be proactive. And I went through the beginning of the book already. So those videos are posted. So you guys can follow along. The way to do it is you read the chapter first on your own. And then you can, like I almost read parts of the chapter, like on the video with everybody. Because people don't read. So even though I tell you to do that, you might not read anything.
From a lazy society.
And so, yeah. And so that way we at least get it in there. And so these are part of the educational element, right, of this group. And there are other books that we're going to go through, but I think that like learning how to live is the first step. And then we can go through specific things like reading Descartes' Meditations and like his dichotomy of body and mind, But I don't know how much that's going to really, like, we can talk about that stuff, but I don't know how much it's really going to make a difference, like today, for whatever you're dealing with, Whereas this book, we talk about the distinction of being proactive and how in every instance there's a stimulus and response. And between that, you have the freedom to choose how you respond. Just me saying that, actually, you can think about that and be like, yeah, I can make a choice. I can choose to not be upset. I can choose to act in a certain way. I can choose to not be reactive, right? And so that's good. That's all right. Let's put that in the pocket. You know what I mean? Whereas like if we talk about like, the analytic synthetic distinction and how some statements can be true by virtue of the statement in itself because of the predicate and the subject and predicate. There we go. Wow.
I'm going to use a lifeline over there.
That's okay. Yeah. I just had to like reel it in. So like if I say a square has a right angle, right? That statement is true because the definition of square or the essence of square is that which has 4 right angles, right? Whereas a synthetic statement is one that's true by virtue of experience or being in the world. So if I say that there is a Chromebook on the table on the table isn't true because of the essence of the Chromebook. Chromebooks aren't always on tables. It's only in this specific situation that this, what appears to be a laptop, but it's not, is there, right?
Don't go all Matrix on me right now.
So that's the Philosophy Society.